Today we're headed for the brilliant Dunolly Museum, where there are some very interesting things we'd like to show you. This museum is set in the heart of Victoria's famous Golden Triangle, and as you may have guessed, it houses a great display on gold. But that's not all it has to offer. There are many intriguing treasures hiding in the museum collection, some of which I think will come as a great surprise. From the first metal detector used on the goldfields to a smoke-dried human head from New Guinea. In this video, we're going to delve into the archives and discover some of the Dunolly Museum's most fascinating relics. This metal detector was the first to be used on the goldfields to search for gold, and was put to work out at Caddo's famous paddock in Riola, an area well known for massive gold nugget discoveries. The detector was made in 1942 for the Australian Department of Defence and was originally used to search for landmines. This is a beat frequency type detector with two oscillators. The power supply is set in a large hand-wheeled barrow which contains a motor generator and a 6-volt car battery. The battery drives the motor, which generated the 90 volts needed to run the valves before the development of low-voltage solid-state electronics in the late 1950s. A long cable was run from the drum like an extension cord, allowing the detector to scan the ground for a considerable distance around the barrow. Among the team that developed these for landmine detection was a fella named Mr. Barnes, and after the war he obtained this particular unit and formed a prospecting syndicate with two others. They had their sights set on the Riola area as a likely spot to search for large gold nuggets, and made contact with Caddo, who owned land there which had yielded incredible discoveries in the past. The prospectors headed out to Riola, where they scanned the ground and marked out a line of targets, which they assumed to be a line of reef. This was set right in the middle of famous nugget country. Imagine their excitement. They reported their find to Caddo, who attended the scene. Upon inspection, he realised that what they'd found was actually an iron water pipe, which had run from a windmill at a dam. After several unsuccessful trips, the syndicate gave up in disgust and left the detector behind in Caddo's shed. Although the detector was not very sensitive and struggled with ground mineralization, there is no doubt that if the coil had been passed over a shallow nugget, the nugget would have been found. Perhaps they should have tried their luck just out the road near the old school at Kingower, where the now famous Hand of Faith lay waiting to be discovered with a detector a few decades later. The landmine detector lay abandoned at Caddo's until it was donated to the museum by Caddo's son in the 1970s. It was overhauled in 2020 and is fully operational. While there were countless incredible gold discoveries here in the Victorian goldfields, there was certainly a lot of frauds as well. These items appear to be evidence of the manufacture of spurious gold, that is, gold which is mixed with other metal to deceive a gold buyer. Here we have pieces of brass cut out from opium tin lids, two of which have had gold melted onto them. A large triangular piece of copper is coated with gold, and a small copper scraping tool has gold on its facing edge. These interesting relics were found at a Chinese camp at Tarnagala. Another interesting Chinese item was discovered at Alma and features a beautifully ornate design. The decorative detail put into this is admirable, especially considering it has been done for a tool which we would view as disposable today. It's very interesting how times have changed. If you have an interest in railway history, then you'll love this one. This is a tool used for the railways to make sure the tracks are laid level, and John Tully of the Dunolly Museum is going to demonstrate using mining rail which is held in the museum collection.
This is a railway gauge designed to check that the rails on train line are correct. They've got little notches in here to show that the rails are the right distance apart, and there's a spirit level to show if one side's dropped or not, so that it can work it out. And then if one side has dropped, they've got a gauge here to push down and measure how much that particular rail has to be raised to get back to level again. So it's all about getting the rails nice and smooth.
Next up, we've got a very unique item which had been improvised by a local miner. Miners' candle holders, also known as miners' spiders, are designed to hold a candle and be driven into the wall of a mine, providing light to the miner as he works. This quirky version has been made using a fork, which has been bent to hold the candle at one end, and the other end was driven into the wall. Although it's not perfect, it certainly would have done the trick. I think this one's absolutely brilliant. Here we have what is known as a prostitute's pendant, which is an interesting necklace designed to look like a locket. Here we can see that it has a hole in the bottom and another hole offset to the side at the top. This pendant, which has been squashed flat over time, used to have a P inside it. It was, in fact, a safety whistle. This was made in England in the 1860s and was found by a metal detector in the Dunolly area. The museum also holds a very significant grinding stone which belonged to King Tommy. King Tommy lived around Lanakuri, Eastville and Eddington, and the stone was found at Hogan's Bridge in Eddington at the site of Henry and Eliza Williams' hut. This was the last place that King Tommy lived. He had been friends with Eliza and her parents for over 30 years. This is a ceremonial grinding stone with a depression in the top for grinding and two underneath for pounding. There are still traces of yellow and red ochre on the stone. Today you can visit a memorial to King Tommy, which is set over his grave in the Dunolly Cemetery. Now, something a little different. The Dunolly Museum houses a great collection of items related to war, and we're going to take a look at a few which really stand out. These were produced by various English companies from 1913, and while at first glance it looks like an ordinary rifle, as you'll see, it's far more interesting than that.
Dunolly Museum's got a lot of firearms. This one tricks many firearm experts. They're not familiar with it. It hasn't got a trigger. It's same weight, length and balance as a standard First World War Enfield rifle. And there's no barrel. There's just a plunger. So although this looks like a rifle, its sole purpose is bayonet practice.
These practice rifles were officially called the Musket Fencing No. 2. These were designed to replicate the weight, length and balance of the standard military issue short magazine Lee Enfield rifle, and the spring-loaded end simulates the use of a bayonet. This particular piece was made by L.W. Greener of Birmingham in 1938. There were many interesting items manufactured for the war, including this army bread slicer. Dating from the Second World War, it was made by Ricketts and Thorpe of Sydney. They were furniture and cabinet makers, and during World War II, they restructured to produce military supplies, such as wooden wing components for aircraft, and devices like this bread slicer. Bread was placed in the machine, which was operated by hand, and it had an adjustment for the thickness of the slices. Now, there are some other items held here from World War II which hint at a dire alternative outcome of the war, which fortunately never became reality here in Australia. These banknotes were part of the Japanese occupation money that was created during the Second World War. They were printed in a choice of values destined for different countries, and they were known collectively as Japanese military yen. Their purpose was to undermine the economy of the occupied country. After taking over a country, these notes were issued and exchanged for local currency at a greatly inflated rate. The inflation resulted in the failure of the local economy and a total reliance on the occupiers. After a short period, the local currency was banned altogether. This particular £1 note was part of the Australian occupation money, which was printed in anticipation of landing here. The OA printed on the note stands for Oceania, Australia. Fortunately, they were never used on mainland Australia. However, the currency did get issued in 1942 in places occupied by the Japanese where Australian currency was legal tender. This included parts of Papua and New Guinea and some Pacific islands. The Dunolly Museum holds something else of great interest from New Guinea. A fella named W.H.P. Wilkinson was a soldier in New Guinea during World War II. And while he was there, he somehow came into possession of a smoke-dried human head, which had been decorated to look like an ornament. He brought it back to Australia with him when he returned. At first glance, this appears to be an ordinary statue, with seashells decorating the eyes and hairline. But underneath lies a real human head. We can see the skull exposed here at the back. This intriguing item was donated to the Dunolly Museum from Wilkinson's estate in the 1970s. Now, this last item is an absolute mystery. Made of brass, this object was found metal detecting in the central goldfields in the 1980s. It was discovered at a Chinese camp, but this doesn't necessarily mean it is a Chinese item. It's an unknown object with an unknown purpose, so if you have any idea what it may have been, please let us know in the comments and help solve this mystery. This video offers just a minute glimpse into the historical collection held at the Dunolly Museum, which is an absolute must-see when exploring the area. The museum is set along the main road through town. You can't miss it. Look for the quartz monument which holds the anvil on which the welcome stranger gold nugget was cut up in 1869, and the impressive mural over the road which depicts the nugget's discovery. The museum is open Wednesdays, Fridays and Sundays. I'll put a link to their website in the description below, where you can also read through a collection of fascinating articles on local history.